My son stood by the window, eyes blazing, gripping the urn that held my husband's ashes. When I called him a scoundrel, for his cruelty, for his insults, for the way he humiliated his own mother, he smiled coldly and hurled the urn through the window. I watched the last traces of the man I loved scatter into the wind, and I knew this was the day I stopped hoping for his kindness and started fighting for my own dignity. Hello, dear ones. My name is Lorraine Washington, and today's story is not a gentle one, but it's a story that many parents, especially those who've given everything to their children, need to hear. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, have you ever wondered where you went wrong raising someone you once cradled with such love? My husband Harold was my rock, my partner, the man who steadied my heart for 47 years. When he passed, it felt like the ground cracked beneath me, but I clung to the belief that our son Jeremy would help hold me up. After all, hadn't we raised him with love, with sacrifice, with lessons about respect, hard work, and family? But grief reveals character. And Jeremy's character, it seemed, was forged from entitlement and contempt. In the months after Harold's passing, Jeremy's visits were filled not with comfort but with demands. Sell the house, liquidate the accounts, hand over the retirement savings. He spoke of investments, but his eyes gleamed with the hunger of someone who mistook inheritance for payday. I tried to reason, to remind him that legacy was more than dollars. His patience thinned. One morning, after yet another argument, I called him out. "You are a selfish, thoughtless scoundrel, Jeremy," I said softly, but firmly. He froze, the vein at his temple pulsing. His gaze slid to the fireplace mantel where Harold's urn rested, delicate, silver, etched with our wedding date. "You think I'm the villain here?" Jeremy hissed, and then, before I could move, he seized the urn, stormed to the window, and with a single, brutal motion threw it into the yard. The crash echoed through my ribs. The world tilted. I ran outside barefoot, heart pounding, kneeling on the lawn as ash mingled with grass and gravel. Jeremy watched from the window, arms crossed, triumphant. That night, I made a decision, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I would no longer feed the beast of his entitlement. No more just helping him through a rough patch, no more he's grieving too. I was grieving too, and I would not let grief excuse cruelty. The next day, I met with our lawyer. I rewrote the will, allocating the house and accounts to my granddaughter, Jeremy's own child, who had shown me more kindness at 16 than her father had at 40. I signed over power of attorney to my niece, a nurse who had stepped in to help with Harold's last days. And when Jeremy stormed in, demanding explanations, I met him with calm resolve. "You buried your father twice, Jeremy," I told him quietly. "Once in the ground and once when you threw his memory out the window. I will not let you do the same to me." He laughed, called me senile, threatened lawsuits. But the funny thing about cruelty is it isolates. His friends drifted away, his daughter moved in with me, and Jeremy was left alone with his rage. Dear listener, parenting does not end when children become adults, but sometimes the lesson we must teach in later years is that love has boundaries, and that some fences must be built to protect the garden, not to keep it from flourishing. Next, you'll hear how Jeremy's spiral dragged us into public scandal and how the quiet strength of family, faith, and community became the shield I never knew I had. Stay with me. This is a story about the ash we rise from, not the ash we scatter. News travels fast in a small town, and even faster when tragedy meets scandal. By the end of the week, neighbors whispered, church friends called, and someone, I still don't know who, tipped off a local reporter. The headline hit hard. Local widow disinherited son after he destroyed father's ashes. I hadn't wanted this to go public, but Jeremy, furious at being cut out, had gone on a social media rampage. He painted himself as the abandoned child, the grieving son, the victim of an unstable mother. He posted pictures of the will paperwork, ranted about elder abuse, and threatened to sue me for mental distress. My phone rang day and night, some calls kind, others cruel. Marcus, my neighbor's son, set up a simple statement for me. "This is a private family matter. I love my son, but I must also stand for respect, dignity, and the values Harold and I shared." But Jeremy wasn't done. He showed up at church that Sunday, walked straight to my pew during the hymn, loud enough for the whole congregation to hear, "Mom, how could you do this to your own son? You're a joke. Dad would be ashamed." The choir stumbled. The pastor's wife gasped. I felt the weight of every eye, but I stood. "Jeremy, you may shame yourself, but you will not shame me here." The silence that followed was a blanket, heavy but protective. After service, Pastor Evelyn pulled me aside. 90 years old, sharp as a tack, she squeezed my hands. Child, you have taught your boy the last lesson you can give, that a mother's love does not mean a mother's surrender. That night, sitting on the porch, I thought of all the ways we parents twist ourselves into knots trying to prevent our children's pain. We cover for them, explain for them, carry their burdens long after they've grown. But sometimes the only gift left to give is the opportunity to face themselves. Jeremy's daughter, Sweet Grace, moved in with me the next month. She wanted stability, a quiet place to finish school, a place where kindness wasn't currency for manipulation. We planted a small garden together. She helped me restore the patch of lawn where Harold's ashes had scattered. One afternoon, she brought out a box. "Grandma, I found this in Dad's attic. It's Grandpa's medals." We sat together on the porch swing, polishing the tarnished brass and remembering a man who gave his family everything and asked for nothing. Grace wept, and so did I, but there was healing in the weeping, and Jeremy, last I heard, he left town chasing some new scheme, another quick win, another handout. My heart aches for him, yes, but my door will stay closed until the day he returns, not with demands, but with humility. Dear listener, if you take one thing from my story, let it be this. Love your children fiercely, but never at the cost of your own soul. Boundaries are not betrayals. Sometimes they are the only path left to real redemption. Next, I'll share how our little home became a gathering place for other parents carrying silent heartbreak, and how we built something none of us expected. A community where dignity is the only inheritance we pass on. Spring rolled in gentle green and full of promises, but my heart still carried winter's weight. Jeremy's absence left a hollow, yes, but not the kind that echoed. It was the kind that, over time, grew quiet. Grace brought laughter back into the house, little by little. She made tea after school, helped me hang laundry, and even convinced me to adopt a scrappy shelter dog named Duke, who seemed to understand broken hearts and wagged his tail at all the right moments. But it wasn't just Grace who came. Word spread, as it does in towns like ours, and soon other parents knocked at my door. Mothers, mostly. One whose son gambled away her savings, another whose daughter vanished into a haze of pills and lies. Fathers who hadn't spoken to their children in years, unsure if the silence was punishment or mercy. They came not to ask for answers, but for company, someone who could say, "You're not crazy, you're not cruel, you're a parent who's hurting." We started small, a Thursday night potluck, just 5 of us sharing casseroles and stories. We cried, yes, but we laughed too. Someone suggested calling it the porch light circle, because no matter how dark it got, there was always one light left on, just in case. And that name stuck. One Thursday, Grace stood up quietly and said, I think Dad could be part of this circle one day." Her voice trembled, but her eyes shone with something fierce. Hope, maybe, or forgiveness, waiting on the edge. And that night, as I lay in bed, I prayed, not for Jeremy to come home, but for him to become someone worth coming home as. But life, as ever, is not tidy. A week later, Grace rushed in after school, pale and breathless. "Grandma, Dad's here." I froze. Duke barked once, then twice, pacing at the door. I stepped onto the porch, hands shaking. Jeremy stood at the edge of the yard, hands in pockets, eyes shadowed. Not angry, not triumphant, just tired. "I don't want anything," he called softly. I saw the garden and the swing and Grace. I walked down the steps, heart pounding. "What are you here for, Jeremy?" He looked up, eyes glistening. "To say I was wrong." And oh, dear listener, that is where today's ends, not in perfect reunion, not in some neat forgiveness, but at the fragile, trembling edge of maybe. Stay with me, because in the next chapter we'll walk together through what happens after the apology, the slow, messy, beautiful work of rebuilding what was shattered. Jeremy didn't cross the yard that day. He stood at the edge like a man testing if the earth would hold his weight. Grace waved shyly. Duke wagged his tail and whined, pulling at the leash. I stayed on the porch, fingers gripping the rail. No rushing, no collapsing into sobs, no rehearsed lines. Just breath, just presence. The next morning, a small envelope arrived, slid under the door. Inside, a note in Jeremy's handwriting. "I'm not ready, but I'm trying. Here's my number. Maybe we can start with that." My hands shook as I tucked it into my Bible, right at the page where Harold's memorial card had lived. The days that followed were a study in slow, one cautious text, one reply. A short call where Jeremy said little and Grace said just enough to keep hope flickering. A Sunday afternoon when he brought over a bag of topsoil and quietly spread it over the garden patch where Harold's ashes had blown away. We didn't speak much, but in the silence, something softened. At the porch light circle, I shared only this. My son is trying. Heads nodded, eyes filled. Someone whispered, "That's a miracle already." But miracles aren't magic. Jeremy slipped sometimes. One week he ghosted our texts. Another he showed up late at night, angry at himself, pacing at the edge of the driveway, wrestling demons I couldn't name for him. And every time I told Grace, we hold a light, but we can't walk his road. The biggest shift came not with words, but with a small act. Jeremy showed up one Thursday, just as the porch light circle was closing. He didn't come inside, but he left a tray of homemade lasagna on the porch steps. Edges burnt, sauce a mess, cheese too thick. Grace burst into tears when she saw it. I just smiled because I knew it wasn't a meal, it was a bridge. Dear listener, this isn't a story of neat redemption or Hollywood endings. This is a story of parenting, of boundaries, of grief, and of the long, uneven road to becoming family again. Harold's ashes are gone, but his love remains in the garden, in the swing, in the daughter-in-law who came home, and even tentatively in the son who is learning what it means to kneel and plant something instead of destroy it. Autumn crept in with cool mornings and the faint scent of wood smoke, but inside my chest the air stayed heavy. Jeremy had cracked the door open with his small steps, texting, yard work, the lasagna. But rebuilding trust was like sewing a torn quilt, slow, delicate, one stitch at a time. And just when you think you're halfway done, the fabric pulls in a way you didn't expect. The porch light circle had grown into something of a phenomenon in town. We were on the local news, invited to speak at the community center, even asked to join a regional parent support network, but not everyone welcomed it. A few people whispered that we were airing dirty laundry, encouraging rebellion, or letting adult children off too easy. Some of that talk reached Jeremy's ears, and I could see it wound him deeper than he admitted. One Thursday evening, as I sat folding chairs under the old oak, Jeremy came by, his shoulders hunched, hands stuffed in jacket pockets. Grace ran to him, but I stayed back, watching. "I don't know if I can keep showing up here," he murmured. "Everyone in town thinks I'm the villain." I wanted to tell him it wasn't true, that people saw his efforts, that hearts were softening. But I'd learned something in these months. My role wasn't to fix his self-image. My role was to be steady, to hold the light, not to carry his cross. "Showing up isn't about what they think, Jeremy," I said gently. "It's about who you're becoming." That night, as the group shared stories, Jeremy sat on the porch steps just listening. When someone spoke about a son they hadn't seen in 5 years, I saw Jeremy flinch, then lower his head. But he stayed. That was new. The next morning brought a surprise, a letter. Formal and unexpected, an invitation from the school board. They wanted me, Grace, and yes, even Jeremy, to speak at a parenting panel about reconciliation, forgiveness, and setting boundaries. I showed Jeremy the letter over coffee. He nearly choked. "Me? Talk about forgiveness?" He let out a hollow laugh. "I'm the one they need forgiving from." "Maybe," I said softly, "but maybe you've got something to say about what it takes to ask for it." We spent the week preparing, mostly me and Grace. Jeremy hovered at the edges, but slowly he started adding thoughts. "Talk about the shame part," he said one night, "and about how easy it is to run instead of face people." On the night of the panel, the school auditorium buzzed with parents, teens, teachers. I wore my Sunday best. Grace sat beside me, eyes bright, and Jeremy lingered near the backstage curtain, tugging at his sleeves like a boy at his first school play. When it was our turn, we took the stage. I spoke first, sharing how love without limits becomes duty without joy. Grace talked about watching adults fail and why trying still mattered more. Then Jeremy stepped up. For a moment, his voice caught, but when he spoke, the room leaned in. "I've broken things I can't fix overnight," he said quietly, "but I've learned that regret isn't the same as change. Change is what you do the day after the apology, and the day after that, and the day after that." We left to quiet applause, but in the parking lot, 2 parents stopped us. One hugged Jeremy without a word, another squeezed my hand, whispering, "Thank you for showing us this kind of courage." That night, Jeremy sat with me on the porch swing, eyes on the moon. "Mom," he murmured, "I'm scared. I'm scared I'll screw this up again." I took his hand, rough and calloused from weeks of hard work. "So am I admitted. But fear's not the end of the story. It's the place where the real chapter starts." And with that, dear listener, we step into the next part of our journey. Not the easy road, but the honest one. Everything we've been building will be tested. A family crisis, a painful revelation, and a choice that will determine whether we hold together or fall apart. Stay with me. The next sunrise may not bring peace, but it will bring truth. The storm hit on a Thursday night, not the kind from the sky, but the kind that rips through a family. Grace had been quiet all day, eyes down, words clipped. That evening, as we cleared up after the porch light circle, she pulled me aside. "Grandma, there's something you need to know." Her voice trembled. "Dad, he's been talking to a lawyer about contesting Grandpa's will." For a moment, the world blurred. The voices around us softened. The dishes in the kitchen became a hum in the distance. "Are you sure?" I whispered. Grace nodded, tears brimming. "He said he wants to fix things, but he's scared, and some lawyer told him it's his right." My heart clenched, not just from anger, but sorrow. Had Jeremy come all this way back to us, only to circle the same old traps? That night, I sat on the porch swing long after Grace went to bed, Duke curled at my feet, the moon tracing silver on the railings. Jeremy arrived late, headlights slicing through the dark, footsteps crunching on the walk. "I heard," I said before he could speak. He sat on the bottom step, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "I didn't file anything, Mom. I panicked. Someone told me I could fix everything if I had the money, and for a second I wanted it." Tears burned, but I kept my voice calm. "Jeremy, do you want to fix things, or do you want the shortcut to feeling better? They're not the same." He let out a choked laugh. "You're right. They're not." The next day, Jeremy stood before the circle, pale and shaking. "I almost messed up again," he confessed, but I didn't, and I won't." There was no applause, just a quiet hum of understanding, the kind of silence that holds you up. We spent the weekend side by side in the garden, replanting the edge where fall winds had ripped through the flowers. Jeremy worked quietly, Grace humming along to the radio, and me? I watched, breathed, and let gratitude settle like sunlight on my shoulders. That Sunday, Jeremy asked to speak at church. "Just a short word," he said. He stood in front of the congregation, voice shaking but clear. "Some of you know me as a man who's broken things, but I'm learning how to repair, and I'm grateful to the people who kept the porch light on." As the choir sang and the congregation filed out, I caught Jeremy's eye across the sanctuary. For the first time in years, he looked not like the boy I remembered or the angry man he'd become, but like someone I had never met, someone becoming. Dear listener, we like to think love is a solid thing, a wall, a shield, a fortress. But sometimes love is a window, a place you stand, watching, waiting, hoping the one you miss will choose to come inside. Next, we will face the biggest test yet, a crisis that will shake not just our family, but the whole porch light circle. And I will learn that sometimes the hardest part of love is letting others rise to meet the moment on their own. It was the night the church roof collapsed. The old beams had been straining for years, but none of us thought they'd give way during a Tuesday night supper. By God's grace, no one was hurt, but the building was wrecked. Our gathering place, our shelter, our porch light. That night, as neighbors gathered under street lamps, stunned and shivering, I saw Jeremy do something I will never forget. He stepped forward. "I'll help rebuild," he said, voice steady. "Not with talk, with work." The next morning, before the sun rose, Jeremy was at the church lot with a thermos of coffee, a hammer, and a quiet determination. He organized volunteers, hauled debris, coordinated with contractors. Grace worked beside him, hair tied up, cheeks smudged with dust. I watched from the sidewalk, tears slipping down, not from sadness, but from something that felt almost like awe. Word spread fast. The porch light circle rallied. The youth group pitched in. Even people who had never set foot inside our meetings came to lift, sweep, donate, pray. And at the center of it all was Jeremy, not leading with speeches, but with presence. I overheard an old deacon whisper, "That boy's got his father's shoulders after all." At night, we sat together on the porch swing, aching but smiling. Jeremy leaned back, gazing at the stars. "Mom, I used to think being a man meant controlling everything. Now I think it's just showing up. I reached over, squeezing his hand. Your father would be proud, and so am I. But, dear listener, life rarely lets you rest on a mountaintop for long. Just as the church walls rose again, a storm of a different kind hit. Jeremy's old debts. A creditor tracked him down, threatening lawsuits, wage garnishment, even liens on anything tied to his name. For a moment, the weight in his eyes returned. The panic, the old temptation to run, but this time he didn't vanish. He came to me, to Grace, to the circle. I need help, he admitted, voice raw, but not a bailout, a plan. We sat late into the night, listing every option. We called in favors, found legal aid, helped him negotiate. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but it was honest. And through it all, Jeremy kept showing up, to the church site, to the circle, to our kitchen table where he helped with dishes and homework and late-night tea. He became not a perfect son, but a real one. Next, I will tell you how we close this chapter, not with a fairy tale ending, but with something far more precious. A family reshaped by trial, held together by choice, and lit, always, by that little porch light that never once went out. A last Sunday of November dawned clear and cold, the kind of morning Harold used to call a sky washed clean. The church stood rebuilt, not just in walls, but in spirit, painted fresh, windows glowing, the little bell restored and ready to ring again. Around it, volunteers milled about, fixing small things, adjusting flowers, sweeping fallen leaves. And at the heart of it all, Jeremy stood, hands in his pockets, eyes shining with something I hadn't seen in years. Peace, mixed with a quiet determination that had been missing from his face for far too long. Grace took his arm, beaming, and the two of them walked up the steps together, carrying a wreath they'd made from the garden's last autumn blooms. I followed a few steps behind, heart full. Duke trotting at my heel, tail wagging like a metronome for joy, occasionally looking up at me as if to check, are we really here? Together like this? Inside, people filled the pews, the porch light circle spilling across 2 rows, joined now by new families, friends, and even a few curious strangers who'd heard about the community that had risen from heartbreak. Pastor Evelyn stood at the pulpit, voice strong despite her 90-plus years, pausing between words to glance warmly over the crowd. When she called us forward to share a few words, Jeremy cleared his throat and turned to me, his hand barely brushing mine, asking softly, Mom, will you stand with me? And so I did. There were tears, yes, mine, Grace's, more than a few in the congregation. But there was also laughter when Duke barked at the final hymn, tail thumping the aisle like an amen, and when Jeremy stumbled over his own words and chuckled, making everyone smile. That night, as the porch light glowed, Jeremy sat beside me, coffee in hand, shoulders brushing mine. We watched the town settle into quiet, the wreath swaying gently on the church door across the way while Grace's laughter floated through the window as she sang along to an old song on the radio. I'm not who I was, Mom, Jeremy murmured, staring up at the stars, but I hope I'm becoming someone worth knowing. I rested my hand over his. You already are. Dear listener, this story began with loss, with anger, with an urn shattered and a heart bruised, but it ends, not in perfection, not in a fairy tale, but in the slow, hard, beautiful work of rebuilding, of parenting, of loving with boundaries and hope held in equal measure. It ends in quiet nights, small reconciliations, shared gardens, and the kind of love that doesn't need to be flashy to be real. If you are sitting tonight in the ache of a family broken, if you wonder whether the porch light matters, hear this from me. Keep it on. Not because they deserve it, not because you owe it, but because light, once offered, makes space for return, and sometimes that's the most powerful thing we can do. And sometimes, even the hardest hearts will find their way back to it. Not all at once, but in slow, clumsy, miraculous steps. Thank you for walking this road with me. Dear friends, before we close this journey, I want to pause and speak directly to you. Many of you have walked alongside me through every chapter, and I know some of you may be asking, what does this story really mean for me, for families like yours, for the quiet heartache so many carry? Let's break it down together. Why did Lorraine set boundaries with Jeremy? Because love without boundaries becomes enabling, And enabling is not kindness. She had to show Jeremy and herself that respect is not optional in love. Why did Jeremy change? Wasn't it too late? No. It's rarely too late to change if a person is willing to face themselves honestly. Jeremy's small steps mattered. The lasagna, the garden work, the public apology. Change is built in actions, not words. Why keep the porch light on? Shouldn't we protect ourselves? Yes. You protect yourself with boundaries, but you leave the light on as an invitation, not a guarantee. The light says, when you're ready to be different, there's a path. It does not say, I'll let you hurt me again. That difference matters. Why did grace play such a key role? Because sometimes the next generation carries wisdom and courage that bridge gaps we thought were permanent. Grace became a quiet connector, showing forgiveness without forgetting, love without blindness. What is the bigger message of this story? It's that redemption is slow, that families rebuild not with grand gestures, but with daily acts. That healing is possible, but it's not guaranteed, and we choose to keep hope alive anyway. Now, dear listener, I ask you, have you ever had to set a hard boundary with someone you love? What happened? Do you believe people can truly change? Why or why not? What small act today could be your version of keeping the porch light on? And most of all, what part of this story moved you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. Share your stories. Remember, here, no one walks alone. Thank you for staying with me till the very last light.